At CCER, there have been a number of ways that I have attempted equity-centered change in our organization. One is just by really refocusing what our focus areas are. As the community center for education results, I feel it is imperative that the work that we do really seeks to ask the questions of ourselves of who is community, in the Pacific Northwest and the Seattle region in particular, where there are a lot of funders who have their own agendas and a lot of organizations like us who have our own agendas, it's really easy to proxy ourselves as community, even though we know good and well that if you actually asked our community with no strings attached what they were interested in, the answers might well be very different than the answers we've come up with, especially since the we in this space is often people who are not of the community we're trying to serve in any way. They don't live in the community. If they do, they're gentrifying a community, and they also do not look like, live like, or get forced to assimilate in ways that the communities we say we're being of service to. So I personally really pushed for equity-driven change in our organization by asking us to ask the questions instead of center into the answers. Um, White supremacist culture has us believing that we have to be the ones who know it all and go and spread our knowledge that is supreme to everybody else's knowledge out into the community. Whereas I think to be in right relationship with our communities, we have to have the questions, and we have to ask those questions in ways that really make space for another way of knowing. So aside from using a lens around what does community mean, I can be frequently heard extolling that we need to begin with race. We always need to lead with race. And even though we, Black folks, don't make up a huge percentage of the population here in the Pacific Northwest, I am extremely committed to eradicating anti-Black racism, as I believe it's one of the first and foremost grounding factors of oppression in this country, and that every other oppression that we lay upon people here starts from that space. So some concrete ways that I've tried to institute racial equity in particular, center change in our organization, is that, as everyone knows, 2020 has been a year. And it has particularly been a year here in our neighborhood where we've had lots of people hit the street pretty consistently in response to George Floyd's murder right before all of our eyes. What I did in that space is we have hired pretty significantly in the past year, where we've doubled the number of Black folks that we have on staff, which is saying a lot for an organization of 20 people where by the percentages, because we've grown as an organization as well, it's only jumped from 20 to 30% of our organization. But by the numbers, we went from having a couple of Black folks on staff to having 8. And in that space, I could see, as those protests and uprisings were happening in the street, the really deep emotional toil it was having on my staff, particularly my Black staff. So we had been talking a long time before COVID happened. It was, we're never going to move to be a remote organization. And then COVID said, yes, you are. But another thing that we had been discussing was unlimited PTO and trusting our staff to know when they needed time off. And so in the space of the unrest in the streets around racial justice, I instituted a very racial justice centered continuous improvement project where we gave unlimited PTO to our Black staff. It was an interesting pushback, but a very great learning space for us to see how difficult it is to operationalize our equity values.